Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping back into the mists of time to an era of castles, knights and lords who controlled your destiny with the stroke of a quill. Today we're exploring what would happen if you lived just one day as a medieval peasant, because trust me, Game of Thrones made it look way too glamorous. So before we dive into the mud and misery, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find comfort in these historical journeys. And let me know in the comments what country you're watching from and what time it is where you are. There's something magical about knowing we're all drifting through history together, no matter where we are in the world. Now settle in, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's transport ourselves to medieval Europe together. Welcome to the year 1347, somewhere in rural England, land of feudal look. Before you even think about opening your eyes, you can already feel the cold seeping through the gaps in your wattle and daubed walls. You're lying on a straw mattress that's seen better centuries, covered by a woolen blanket that scratches like it's personally offended by your skin. There are no glass windows in your hovel, just wooden shutters that do about as much to keep out the cold as a politician's promise keeps out disappointment. The air smells of smoke, unwashed bodies, and something that might be last week's turnips slowly decomposing in the corner. By the time you force yourself upright, your breath is already forming clouds in the frigid air. It's not even dawn yet, but medieval peasants don't get to sleep in. The rooster crowing isn't your alarm clock, it's your boss, and he's already late for work. You stumble toward your wooden chest, the only piece of furniture you own besides your bed, and pull out the same tunic you've worn for the past 3 months. Washing clothes is a luxury reserved for special occasions like weddings, funerals, or when the smell becomes strong enough to scare away the life. Your boots, if you're lucky enough to have them, are made of leather so crude it's basically just cow skin with good intentions. Most days you'll wrap your feet in rags and hope for the best. The floor of your cottage is packed earth mixed with straw, and it's cold enough to make your toes go numb within seconds. As you step outside, the medieval world greets you with all the charm of a tax collector. The village streets are a mixture of mud, animal droppings, and whatever the neighbours decided to throw out their windows yesterday. There's no street lighting, no paved roads, and definitely no morning coffee to ease you into consciousness. Just the harsh reality of another day where survival isn't guaranteed and comfort is a foreign concept. And this is just waking up. Time to address your basic hygiene needs, and by hygiene I mean the bare minimum required to not offend the local pigs. First, let's talk about your bathroom situation. Spoiler alert, there isn't. If you're living in a village, you'll share a communal latrine with your neighbours, which is basically a wooden bench with holes cut in it, positioned over a pit that hasn't been cleaned since the Norman conquest. Privacy is a luxury concept that won't be invented for another few centuries. You'll do your business while chatting with neighbours about the weather, crop yields, and whether the Lord's new tax collector looks more like a weasel or a particularly unpleasant goat. If you're really unlucky and live in a larger town, you might have to use a public garderobe, which hangs over the town wall so waste drops directly into the moat or street below. Medieval urban planning at its finest. That's just expensive parchment that could be better used for important things like recording how much grain you owe the Lord. Instead, you'll use whatever's handy, leaves, cloth scraps, or if you're feeling fancy, a handful of moss. In your face involves a wooden bowl, some water that's been sitting in a barrel for who knows how long, and a prayer that whatever's growing in it won't give you a rash. Soap exists, but it's made from animal fat and ash, costs more than you make in a week, and has the delightful texture of sand mixed with grease. Brushing your teeth means rubbing them with a cloth, maybe some salt if you're prosperous, or just chewing on a twig and hoping for the best. Your weekly bath, if you take one, happens in a wooden tub filled with water heated over the fire. The same water gets used by the whole family, starting with the father and working down to the smallest child. By the time the baby gets dunked, the water looks like vegetable soup that's gone very, very wrong. So yes, you're now as clean as medieval standards allow, which means you smell like a barnyard, but at least you're not actively decomposed. Time for breakfast. You've managed to make yourself presentable by medieval standards, which means you no longer smell like something that died under a bridge. Now it's time for the most important meal of your day, and by important, I mean whatever you can scrape together before you collapse from hunger. Medieval breakfast isn't a meal, it's a negotiation with starvation. You sit on a wooden stool at a rough table, if your family is wealthy enough to own furniture, or just squat on the floor like most people. The centerpiece of your morning feast is bread, but don't imagine anything like what you'd find in a modern bakery. This bread is dark, dense, and made from whatever grains were available after paying taxes to the Lord, tithes to the church, and bribes to the tax collector. It's often mixed with sawdust, acorns, or beans to make it go further. The crust is hard enough to be used as a weapon, and the inside has the texture of damp cardboard with aspirations of being food. But it's calories, and in medieval times, calories are the difference between life and becoming a statistic. If you're incredibly fortunate, you might have some ale to wash down your sawdust sandwich, and before you get excited, medieval ale isn't the crisp, refreshing beverage of modern times. It's thick, flat, and tastes like someone dissolved bread in swamped water and added a hint of regret. But it's safer than drinking water, which is basically a liquid roulette wheel of diseases you can't pronounce. Porridge is another breakfast staple made from oats, barley, or whatever grain survived the rust. It's cooked in a pot that's been used for everything from washing clothes to boiling medicinal herbs, so it comes with a unique flavor profile that could charitably be described as rust. You eat it with a wooden spoon that's been carved by someone who clearly had better things to do. If it's a feast day or someone in the village got lucky hunting, you might find a small piece of bacon or dried fish in your bowl. Protein is precious, more valuable than silver, and treated with the reverence usually reserved for religious relics. As you chew your way through breakfast, flies buzz around your head like tiny medieval paparazzi. You swat at them with one hand while protecting your food with the other, because sharing your meal with insects isn't generosity, it's just another day ending in why breakfast in medieval times isn't about taste or nutrition, it's about survival. It's fuel for a body that's about to be pushed to its absolute limits. And it's probably the best meal you'll have until tomorrow morning, assuming you live that long. You've choked down your breakfast of disappointment and despair, and now it's time for the main event, work. And let me tell you, medieval labour makes modern overtime look like a spa vacation. Unless you're nobility, clergy, or dead, your job is going to involve more sweat than a medieval torture chamber and about as much fun. If you're a farmer, which statistically you probably are since 90% of medieval people worked the land, your day starts before sunrise and ends when you literally cannot see your hands in front of your face. You'll be working strips of land that belong to your lord, using tools that would make a modern gardener weep. Your plough is wooden with maybe an iron tip if you're lucky, pulled by oxen that are probably smarter than your lord's youngest son, but considerably less well fed. You'll plant barley, oats and rye in fields that haven't seen fertilizer except for whatever the animals left behind. Speaking of animals, you'll spend a good portion of your day chasing chickens, milking cows that seem personally offended by your existence, and trying to prevent pigs from eating everything. If you're a craftsman, congratulations, you have slightly more job security than the farmers, which is like saying you're slightly less likely to be struck by lightning. As a blacksmith, you'll work over a forge that turns your workshop into a medieval sauna while you hammer red-hot metal into horseshoes, tools. The constant heat, smoke and flying sparks mean most blacksmiths look like they've been in a fight with a dragon and lost. You'll work with hand tools that require the strength of an ox and the precision of a surgeon, because one mistake means starting over, and starting over means your family doesn't eat. If you're a woman, your job is even more complex because it's actually several jobs disguised as usual: cook, clean, raise children. There are no lunch breaks, no sick days, and definitely no workers' compensation. If you get injured, you keep working or you starve. If you get sick, you keep working or you die. And if you complain, well, there are plenty of other peasants who would be happy to take your job, assuming happiness is possible in medieval times. Work in medieval life isn't just hard labour, it's a daily wrestling match with poverty, exhaustion, and the ever-present knowledge that you're one bad harvest away from catastrophe. After spending your morning pretending that turnips are a sustainable career choice, you might think you deserve a break, maybe a little rest. Well, think again, because you're forgetting the most important fact about medieval life. You're not actually free. You're a serf, which is basically slavery with better marketing. You belong to the land, and the land belongs to your lord, which through the magic of feudal math means you belong to your lord. You can't leave without permission, you can't marry without approval, and you can't die without paying a tax. Because apparently even death has a cover charge in medieval times. Your lord lives in a castle that cost more than your village will earn in a century, surrounded by walls thick enough to stop an army, but apparently not thick enough to stop him from hearing every complaint from the peasants below. He owns everything. The land you work, the house you live in, the mill where you grind grain, and probably the air you breathe, though he hasn't figured out how to tax that yet. Every decision in your life requires permission from someone above you in the feudal chain. Want to repair your roof? Better ask the Lord Steward. Want to sell a chicken? That'll require a permit and a fee. Want to move to the next village where your cousin lives? That's not just moving, that's treason, because you're abandoning your lord's property, namely yourself. And let's talk about taxes, because medieval taxation makes modern tax codes look simple and fair. You pay rent for your land in the form of labour, crops, and whatever coins you can scrape together. You pay tithes to the church because God apparently needs money. You pay tallage when your lord feels like collecting extra revenue. You pay heriot when someone dies because death is taxed. You even pay merchant if you want to marry because love is apparently a luxury service. If you're thinking about rebellion, don't. The last peasant uprising was crushed faster than a bug under a warhorse's hoof, and the survivors were hanged, drawn. Your lord has the right to judge crimes, collect taxes, and decide whether you live or die. He's like a one-man government with the temperament of a toddler and the power of a deity. And the best part, this system is considered divinely ordained, which means questioning it isn't just illegal, it's heretical. So remember, in medieval times, freedom isn't just expensive, it's literally not for sale. You've survived half a day in medieval times, which means you're either remarkably resilient or remarkably lucky, because both are required to make it past lunch in the 14th century. And speaking of lunch, it's time to address the elephant in the room, medieval cuisine, which makes prison food look like a Michelin-starred experience. Your midday meal, if you're fortunate enough to have one, consists of whatever was left over from breakfast plus anything you could forage, catch or steal without getting hanged. The main course is usually pottage, a thick stew made from whatever vegetables haven't rotted, grains that survived the weevils, and maybe some meat if something died recently and you got to it before the flies did. Vegetables in your pottage are mostly onions, leeks and cabbage, cooked until they surrender all pretense of being food and become merely edible matter. Spices exist, but they cost more than most people's houses, so you'll flavour your meal with salt if you have it, or just the bitter tears of medieval existence. If you're really living the dream, you might have some cheese, which is milk that's been left alone long enough to develop its own ecosystem. Cheese has character, personality, and probably several new forms of bacteria that won't be discovered until the invention of microscopes. Bread appears at every meal because it's filling, cheap, and can be used as a plate, napkin, or emergency building material. You'll eat off trenchers, which are slabs of stale bread that absorb the juices from your food, making them slightly less appetizing but more nutritionally complete than the actual meal. It is a luxury reserved for special occasions like weddings, religious festivals, or when your lord's hunting party accidentally kills one of your chickens and feels guilty enough to let you keep half of it. So when you do get meat, it's usually salted, smoked, or preserved in ways that remove all flavour, while somehow making it as dangerous, because medieval sewage systems are basically just creative ways to poison the water supply. So you drink ale, weak wine, or milk that's questionable at best and potentially lethal at worst. Everything you consume carries the risk of food poisoning, parasites, or death, which really adds excitement to mealtime. You eat with your hands, a knife if you own one, and a wooden spoon that's been passed down through generations like a family heirloom, because in medieval times, cutlery is an investment. Dining in medieval times isn't about pleasure or nutrition, it's about consuming enough calories to survive until the next meal, assuming there is one. The afternoon sun is beating down, which in medieval times means it's time for the most dangerous part of your day, being outside while poor, because in the Middle Ages, simply existing in public space as a peasant is like wearing a sign that says, "Please exploit me, I have no legal recourse." First, there's the ever-present danger of your lord's soldiers who patrol the area looking for tax evaders, poachers, or people who seem too happy for their social station. These men are armed, bored, and have the legal right to arrest you for crimes you didn't know existed, like looking suspicious while peasanting or possessing vegetables without proper documentation. Then there are the bandits, who are basically unemployed soldiers with entrepreneurial spirit and flexible ethics. If bandits rob you, there's no police force to report it to, no insurance to file a claim with, and no reasonable expectation that anyone will care. The Black Death might be the famous one, but there are plenty of other plagues, poxes, and pestilences just waiting to turn you into a statistic. And since medical knowledge consists mainly of pray harder and try bleeding more, wolves, bears, and wild boars don't respect property lines, and they're considerably better armed than you are. Your defense against a charging boar is essentially a wooden staff and whatever prayers you can remember under pressure. Weather is another medieval enemy. There's no meteorology, no weather forecasts, and no preparation for storms beyond hoping your roof doesn't collapse. Floods, droughts, and harsh winters can wipe out entire villages, and there's no disaster relief beyond whatever charity the church feels like providing. In medieval times, attracting attention from nobles, church officials, or tax collectors is never good news. The worst case involves dungeons, torture, and creative interpretations of justice that would make modern lawyers quit their jobs and become farmers. Your safety strategy is simple. Keep your head down, work hard, pay your taxes, and pray that nobody important remembers you exist. It's not much of a life plan, but it's better than the alternative. As the day begins its slow descent toward evening, your body is already keeping a detailed inventory of everything that hurts, which in medieval times is basically everything. Your back aches from bending over crops, your hands are raw from handling rough tools, and your feet feel like they've been used as test subjects for a particularly vindictive cobbler. But wait, there's more suffering to be had, because medieval medicine is about to make your day even more interesting. If you're injured, sick, or just feeling generally awful, your treatment options range from completely useless to actively harmful. Your local healer is usually some combination of herbalist, priest, and con artist who learned medicine by watching other people die and taking notes. They have access to a fascinating array of treatments that include bloodletting, which is based on the theory that removing blood will somehow make you healthier, despite all evidence to the contrary. Have a headache? Time for some trepanation, which involves drilling holes in your skull to let the evil spirits escape. Here's a potion made from crushed beetles, unicorn horn, actually narwhal tusk, and enough alcohol to make you forget why you came for treatment in the first place. Your healer will set it using splints made from whatever wood is handy, bind it with cloth that may or may not be clean, and tell you to pray for the best while preparing for the worst. Anesthesia doesn't exist, so you'll bite down on a leather strap and try not to scream loud enough to disturb the neighbours. Toothaches are treated by pulling teeth with pliers designed for entirely different purposes, performed by someone whose medical training consisted of "I've done this before," and the patient only died twice. There's no Novocaine, no antiseptic, and no reasonable expectation of survival. Surgery is available for the truly desperate or insane. Medieval surgeons work with tools that look like they were borrowed from a torture chamber in conditions that would make a modern hospital inspector faint, using techniques that are part medicine, part guesswork, and part prayer. But here's the twist. Sometimes medieval medicine actually works. It's just surrounded by so much superstition, ignorance, and accidental poisoning that finding actual treatment is like searching for a needle in a haystack made of needles. Your best medical strategy is simple. Don't get sick, don't get injured, and if you do, have a very high pain tolerance and excellent life insurance, assuming life insurance has been invented yet, which it hasn't. As evening approaches and your body catalogues its daily collection of new aches and pains, it's time to address one of medieval life's most persistent challenges: the complete absence of entertainment. Contemplating your mortality. Your evening entertainment options are limited but creative. You can sit by the fire and tell stories, assuming you know any stories that aren't about people. You can sing songs, provided they're about praising God, celebrating your Lord, or mourning the dead, because happy songs about peasant life haven't been invented yet. If you're feeling particularly adventurous, you can play simple games with dice made from animal bones, though gambling is technically a sin, so you'll need to confess it later and probably pay a fine to the church for the privilege of having briefly enjoyed yourself. And not dying to learn dead languages. Music exists, but musical instruments are expensive and playing them requires free time, which is a luxury concept that won't be invented for several centuries. You might own a simple pipe or drum if you're particularly prosperous, but most musical entertainment comes from visiting minstrels who travel from village to village, spreading news, gossip, and occasionally luncheon. Dancing happens during festivals, but medieval dancing is less about fun and more about community obligation. You dance because everyone else is dancing, because the church says dancing is appropriate on certain holy days, and because standing still for too long. Storytelling is the evening's main event, with tales passed down through generations about heroes, monsters, and people who lived in better times when food was plentiful and lords were slightly less terrible. These stories serve multiple purposes. They entertain, preserve history, and provide escapist fantasy about worlds where peasants occasionally have good days. If you're really desperate for entertainment, you can always contemplate the theological implications of your suffering, which the church assures you is character building and will be rewarded in the afterlife, assuming you don't do anything to mess up your chances between now and then. Evening entertainment in medieval times isn't about having fun, it's about filling the dark hours before sleep with something that isn't work, prayer, or existential dread, though it often includes all. As darkness falls and your daily struggle with survival enters its final phase, it's time to prepare for sleep, which in medieval times is less peaceful rest and more temporarily unconscious survival motions. Your bedtime routine would make modern insomniacs grateful for their comfortable beds and climate-controlled bedroom. First, you'll secure your humble dwelling against the various threats that medieval nights bring. Wild animals, bandits, hostile neighbours, and supernatural entities that may or may not exist but definitely aren't worth risk. And you'll bar your door with a heavy wooden beam, close your shutters, and pray that whatever strange noises you hear during the night are just the wind and not something with teeth and questionable intention. Your bed is the same straw mattress you woke up on, now additionally seasoned with a full day's worth of sweat, dirt, and whatever insects decided to make it their home while you were out working. The straw needs regular changing, but fresh straw costs money and energy you don't have, so you'll make do with what you've got until it becomes more ecosystem than bedding. Your blanket is a woolen affair that's scratchy, smells like wet sheep, and has holes strategically placed to let in maximum cold. You'll wrap yourself up like a medieval burrito and try to generate enough body heat to prevent hypothermia while you sleep. Personal hygiene before bed consists of maybe splashing some water on your face if you have water left over from cooking, and changing out of your work clothes into your sleeping clothes, which are the same clothes but slightly less dirty because you haven't worn them all day. Prayer is an essential part of the bedtime routine. both because the church requires it and because you genuinely need all the divine intervention you can get. You'll pray for protection during the night, successful crops, your Lord's continued indifference to your existence, shared with your entire family, any animals small enough to bring inside for warmth, and whatever rodents have taken up residence in the wall. Privacy is not a medieval concept, and personal space is whatever area you can defend with your elbows. Sleep itself is interrupted by cold, hunger, strange noises, crying children, snoring relatives, and the general discomfort of trying to rest on medieval furniture, designed by people who apparently believed comfort was a moral. But eventually, exhaustion wins, and you drift off to sleep, dreaming of better days, warmer beds, and a world where surviving until morning isn't considered a significant achievement. And there you have it, one complete day in medieval times from sunrise to sunset, with all the charm, comfort, and basic human dignity that the Dark Ages are famous for providing, which is to say none whatsoever. So the next time you're having a bad day at work, remember the medieval peasant who would consider your worst Monday morning a miraculous improvement in their quality of life. At least you have indoor plumbing, processed food, and the reasonable expectation of waking up tomorrow without having to fight off wolves or pay taxes to someone who thinks they're divinely appointed to own it. Thanks for joining me on this journey through medieval misery. If this helped you appreciate modern conveniences, remember, no matter how bad things seem today, at least you're not a medieval peasant. Sweet dreams, and may your nightmares be historically inaccurate.